During World War II, the street lamps in the city of Pittsburgh burned for 24 hours a day. They did this because the city was thick with smoke from the steel mills. They were turning out steel for the war effort. It must have been horrible. But it was, in many ways, a source of pride for the local population. I mean, there was a war on. This was a desperate time. I'm sure the street lamps didn't help much at all. But there we have it. 40 years later, I was in Pittsburgh in college, and one of the biggest industries in town was cleaning buildings. Buildings that were these gray lumps were being hosed down very carefully to reveal white marble, all kinds of decoration, beautiful buildings that had been cloaked in gunk, things that were left over from time of, well, the time that built Pittsburgh, the time that made the city what it was. But the times had changed. And at that point, the steel mills had all closed except for the Homestead Mill that was running mostly scrap. This, to me, is what environmentalism, unfortunately, has to go through. I mean, for example, here during this time of crisis, the local Trader Joe's in San Francisco actually doesn't even allow you to bring in your own bags anymore for health reasons. See, we can care about the environment to the extent that we're not desperate. That seems extremely unfortunate. I mean, not taking care of the world around us is only going to make things worse. But desperate times call for desperate measures, or so it seems. And here in this moment when it seems like maybe nature is trying to kill us all, well, environmentalism is one of the last things anyone thinks about. When was the last time you thought about it? As we talk about remaking the world and genuine progress, it seems funny to think about environmentalism sometimes, but yet it is absolutely critical that we take care of the planet around us. The problem is that in times of shortage, desperation, well, taking care of the world seems like a terrible luxury. It's one of those stages that the world simply has to go through. And we see this in developing nations. At first, they just really don't care about the world around them. And then as the population becomes wealthier or feels wealthier and sees things changing, suddenly people start to care a lot. We saw this in Japan, where there's a very strong environmental movement, and in South Korea as they developed. Even in China, as it's been developing, had the horrible situation of clouds of smoke billowing over cities. And despite the authoritarian government, people complained pretty bitterly about it. And slowly something is being done, even by a strongly centralized government. I wish it wasn't this way, but it seems to be. I wish I could tell you that there was a great market method for taking care of the environment. Certainly one of my favorite economists, Graciela Cikolnicki, has been proposing a carbon tax. This is something, of course, implemented from the top down, but taxing you based on how much carbon you burn and how much CO2 you put into the air, contributing to global warming. It is definitely a solution that is market-based, and it's worthy of noting. But it is only when we move to a time of abundance that people really begin to care about the environment. Now, a good criticism of everything I've been talking about so far is you don't talk about environmental issues at all. You're right, I haven't. And it's been for one simple reason. I believe that the entire system that we have right now in place doesn't lend itself towards taking care of our planet. It's just not set up that way at all. And it's not until we move to a time of great abundance and we realize a great feeling of wealth among all people that we're really going to do it. That sounds terribly cynical, but it's how I feel it has to come down. The system of debt-based money, credit-based money, requires us to constantly expand, requires us to constantly, well, we're moving resources from tomorrow into today, and then we have to realize tomorrow. Progress is put up as the antonym of the basically conservative value of conserving our resources, protecting things. How can you have progress if you are conservative? It's a terrible dilemma. It shouldn't be the case, but the world that we have been living in sets it up that way. Taking care of the world is just a luxury. What I've been trying to talk about is a world of abundance and how we manage abundance. And hopefully setting up the world where taking care of it is something that comes quite naturally. Preserving the resources we have so that they can be passed on to future generations. That sounds like a terrible punt, but unfortunately, it's the conclusion I've come to. You may have a different conclusion, and I would love to hear about it. But I do believe that when we remake the world, this is simply the way it has to be. That if we set things up properly, so that everybody has what they need, it is only natural that we're going to start taking care of the world around us. And we have seen this in developing nations. It's unfortunately one step at a time. Now, if you look at television shows like, say, Star Trek, for example, they dealt with, at least in the Next Generation, the big reboot of the show, it was all about dealing with a time of abundance. This was actually true to Gene Roddenberry's original vision of the world that he was trying to promote in the original Star Trek, although they wound up emphasizing the action-adventure part way more because it was the 60s, it was television. But they were able to explore that in more depth later on. And it's really a key part of all science fiction. We see that there is going to be a time of great abundance in the future. And we get interesting statements like, you still have money? Things like that. The problem is that even in the Star Trek world, it was presumed that there was going to be some terrible global event sometime in the 21st century. There are hints of a great world war, for example, that destroys everything. Perhaps this is that global event. Perhaps this is the time when we deliberately remake our society so that we have a feeling of abundance and we manage abundance, not scarcity. I believe, perhaps cynically, that this is the only way that we can properly take care of the planet. The example to me comes from Pittsburgh. The example comes from the United States, that as we gradually became more wealthy and feeling better, we started enacting environmental protection laws. Only after the Cuyahoga River caught fire. It takes an event like that to shock everybody, to make us realize what we have to protect. And progress is often set up against conserving what we have. That's the system. That's what we have. That's what we need to change before we can get out of this very, very false conflict that has been set up. It's not real. I haven't talked about environmental issues simply because, as we know it, progress comes at the expense of the environment. That's what has to change first, because it's not a real conflict. One step at a time. And we see this happening, well, it happened in the United States too, didn't it? It happened in the developed world. There was a time when London's air was also very much unbreathable, but eventually that was fixed. And the public health issues like rampant typhoid or cholera were taken care of. It has to happen, but it happens in stages. I wish it wasn't so. But what I hope more than anything else is that we can move on to that next stage and get out of the false conflict. That's really what I'm talking about. Rather than say, oh, we need to take care of the environment. Everybody knows that. Preaching more and more doesn't really do anything. And we can set up little things here and there. Plastic bag ban here in California. Okay, fine. Um, it's good, but it's really just scratching the surface. I don't think we're ever going to be able to really take care of the planet until we have some fundamental changes. And the wealth of the world is genuinely shared. To me, that's what progress is all about. Environmentalism is unfortunately a great symbol of having made progress, not a symbol of making it. I wish it wasn't so. But as we go through all of the changes we go through, environmentalism will become a part of it. And the changes have to take place from good leadership at the top and good action at the bottom, like all great change management. And that's what I want to talk about next. And yes, I will start mentioning more about how we take care of the planet, because an economics that takes into account what all of the externalities, right? The air we breathe, the water we drink, is extremely important. It's a pretty classic market failure. How we set up a system that takes into all of those into account without being top down and heavy and forcing everybody to do everything is really the trick. But in a time of abundance, it becomes much easier. Thank you.